Take The Hangover, Midsummer, bodies, put them into a blender, and then strain that into a can of Bundy rum. That's Birdeater. This movie should be shown to every 16-year-old Australian male. It's about how much bad behaviour we're willing to take for the sake of tradition. And one of the writers came up with the idea for this film as he went to a prestigious Sydney private school, and he was on a footy trip, and it was run by the old boys of the footy trip, and he just saw so much fucked up behaviour that he's like, I've got to write a movie about this one day. This movie is so Aussie, and it's so tense. It does something amazing at highlighting all the little sort of fucked up things we do to each other as young Aussie men who, especially when we're drinking. Like drunk young guys, they'll give each other little nicknames that are often really awful or embarrassing, or they'll trick other people into getting really fucked up, or they'll push other people to get fucked up through weird drinking games. It's all really... It's a good reflection. It's a great movie to just sit and go, oh yeah. I've definitely been in a situation where I'll be telling my missus about a time where, something happened to me at a party where I was drinking with all the young blokes in high school, and something happened, and she'll be like, oh my god, Jesus, are you alright? That's really messed up. And I'm like, oh no, like it was funny, like it was like a funny thing. They just shaved like my eyebrows or a bit of my hair or whatever, and she's like, yeah, that's like, the stuff they do to prisoners of war and stuff. And it's like, yeah, you're right, they do that. That is fucked up, now I think about it. Lads, cast your eyes back. I'm sure there's something, right? And this movie isn't against bucks parties or footy trips or lock-ins or piss-ups altogether. This is not what that movie's about. This movie's about watching out for people who use those events as an excuse for absolutely abhorrent behaviour. This is one of the best horror films I've seen this year. It's one of the best films I've seen this year, and it's a directorial debut by Jack Clark and Jim Weir, and that's fucking great. Like, currently, Aussies they'd be swinging for the horror fences, and I'm all here for it. It's also definitely not a straight-up horror film, so if you go in expecting that, I think you'll be disappointed. It's a bit of a genre bender. It's incredibly funny. There are multiple laugh-out-loud moments in this movie. Fuck, it's funny, especially if you've been around that drinking culture. But it's also uncomfortable, it's psychedelic, it's abstract, it's fucking panic attack inducing at points. Birdeater follows couple Luis and Irene. Irene's from England. Luis he's an Aussie lad. And even though they're engaged, something's off, right? Right from the get-go, you're like, there's something weird about this dynamic here. Lewis seems to spend a lot of time at night, like he goes to work. He's always got excuse. Oh, I've got to go see my dad. Oh, I've got to go pick up this from the office. I've got to go in for a fire drill. And Irene, you can tell that really makes Irene anxious, or she gets upset about that. So she takes a pill, to sedate herself, basically. And eventually the time comes for Lewis's Bucks party, and he wants to opt for a more modern vibe. So he goes, hey, Irene, I'd like you to come. The boys would like you to come. We'd like to make like a weekend of it. And she's a bit like, that's weird, but okay. And this is it's pretty much Midsummer to a T until this point. So they go out to this remote rural farmhouse in the sticks, and we get to meet all of Lewis's friends. There's the hyper-masculine pisspot Dylan, there's the sort of psychedelic drug fan Murph, there's bickering Christian couple Charlie and Grace, and even a surprise guest from from Irene's past called Sam. As the number of drinks consumed goes up, the vibes go way the fuck down, and we get to take our place at a little viewing window into what I can only detail is probably the most hellish Bucks party on earth. Now, like I said, this is not a straight up horror, right? Like, this this is not a haunted house. This is not like a slasher. But it's more like a social horror, almost dinner party horror, you could say. The acting is phenomenal, though. The acting is so fucking good. Mackenzie Fearnley plays Louis, and he's this perfectly manipulative little prick. It works so, but he's not outright. Like, it's not straight up. It's not in your face. It takes its time to manifest. Shabana Azeez plays Irene, and I found her way more interesting than most. Usually when in horror, we see a lot of domestic abuse or emotional abuse or whatever, psychological abuse, and usually there's two ways the character's played. It's hysterical woman, or it is like backseat, like weak woman, can't do anything, has no opinions of her own, right? This is not that. This is, she has bits where she defends Louis, she has bits where she's upset at other people, she has her own opinions, she has her own thoughts on their relationship. There are times where she's fucking where you're like, Jesus Christ, woman, they're trying to help you. It's fucking great. It's really good. And because of all the situations and social situations that this movie puts the characters through, you get to see how each character responds to a different situation, and that results in a lot of behavioral changes, but it also results in you going like, you get to play like, who the fuck is the worst person at this point in time, right? At the start of the movie, there's somewhat of a red herring, and you're like, okay, you're a problem. You're going to be a problem. And then someone will say something about someone's lifestyle, or someone will bring up something from the past, and then you go, you're the problem. Like, you're actually the worst person here. And you do that the whole time. It's constantly flicking between who's the worst person here. It also goes to show that sometimes it's better the devil you know, right? Like, if, lads, here's a good indicator of a red flag, right? This is a red flag. If you've got a mate who acts completely differently with you than they do with their partner, that is a huge red flag, right? That is them wearing a mask. And I'm not talking about like someone gets a touch of the tism talking about fucking Warhammer with their mates, or the fucking Roman Empire, whatever. We all hyperfixate on hobbies we love. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about full behavioral change, talking differently, how they act, like how do they act when their partner is not around. If that is a drastic change, that's a fucking red flag. They're wearing a mask, man. It showcases gaslighting probably better than almost any, or realistic gaslighting better than almost any film I've seen in the past couple of years. The best other example I can think of is probably The Invisible Man, but with The Invisible Man, because the villain has so many resources to make the gaslighting happen, it doesn't seem as realistic. This is realistic. You have probably seen this sort of behavior happen to someone you love, or unfortunately by someone you love. It's super realistic. It's super insidious. It also showcases social abuse, which is abuse is sort of when you get into a relationship with someone, right? And then they don't want you to see your friends. Your friendship group morphs into just their friends. They do that so they can control you. That's usually why that happens. Cults do the exact same thing. It's a form of isolating someone so that you get control over their entire life. This does social abuse better than, I think, any film I've ever seen, right? It's really, really fucking good, and it's really, really, really realistic. Everyone's kind of awful. Everyone's kind of flawed. It's really, really good. It's also shot fucking beautifully. These guys are first-time directors, and this is probably the best the Aussie bush has ever looked. I felt like I was just at a paddock party watching this. It's awesome. It's really, really good. They did a fucking wonderful job at shooting this, and I know they had some problems in development with like funding and all that sort of stuff, so I'm really glad it looks this fucking good. You can't tell. I think my best on ground is Ben Hunter as the pisspot Dylan. We've all met this guy. We have all met this guy. There is a scene where he grabs Louis a beer, and Louis like, oh, nah, man, I don't want a beer. And he's like, It blows his mind. He cannot wrap his head around the fact that you will not want a beer at your Bucks party. There's all that, standard like, oh, come on, mate, it's just a fucking beer. What do you do? You're not going to have a beer at your Bucks party. You're like, what a dog. All that sort of shit. We've all met this guy. He plays them absolutely beautifully. And that scene where Louis doesn't want a beer is so realistic. And like, I've been there. I've been in that scene. It also highlights how awfulness between couples is often swept under the rug because we're like, oh, you don't know their life. You don't know what it's like for them back home, It's complicated. Usually it's not complicated. If two people have been awful to each other, it's pretty fucking simple. Or if one person's been awful to another person, you should stand up and say, hey man, not on. Right? That's what you should do. But because they're together, you're like, oh, well, I don't want to get involved. Maybe they like being awful to each other. No one likes that shit. It's a bit of a call to action, being like, hey man, call this behavior out if you see it. It's stand up, even if it's with your friends, even if it's with your family members or whatever, stand up and say, hey, you can't talk to her like that, or you're acting like a fuckwit right now, that is what this movie is really good at. It's very much a call to action. The dinner party scene in this movie is like top tier passive aggression and hostility, almost bordering aggression straight out. There's like a really awkward best man speech. Not since the Rocky Horror Picture Show has awkwardness and hostility at a dinner table been more palpable. And when shit finally fully flies off the handle, it takes a turn into this really psychedelic, abstract movie that it's scary is not the right word, but it's super unsettling, it's super disturbing. It's really awful, and it's good. Like, it's such a great watch. Everything gets laid out on the table, everything gets explained, and it's a sight to behold. Watching everything unfold it's really good in this film. Now, the problem most people are going to have with this film is the ending. It doesn't wrap anything up neatly. This doesn't wrap everything up in a neat little bow, okay? So, there are some loose strings, and I can see that pissing people off. However, this is a horror film that's really based in reality, and in reality, nothing's a clean break. There's rarely any event or whatever that happens that you can go, all right, we'll never talk about that again. That'll just never happen. That'll never come up. There are often loose ends, and so I feel like it worked for this movie, but I can see some people fucking hating that. But this movie is absolutely worth your time. Please go see this movie. It's an indie horror film. Between Birdeater, Talk to Me, and You'll Never Find Me, the next generation of Aussie horror directors, like, fuck, we're in such good hands. There's so much talented direction coming out of Australia. I'm so fucking excited to see what the next couple of years holds. I recommend watching this if bloke horror scares you. Wolf Creek, Wake in Fright, Killing Ground. Anything where the villain is sort of like some macho fuck who's like, this is one of those. If you want to hear the term use in the perfect way, this is exactly how dog is supposed to be used, right? If you're a guy who's been on a footy trip or a Bucks party and you've sat back, or there's been a point where you're like, this is really fucked up. This is really fucked up what's happening here. This is for you. Partners. If you have a partner who's like, hey, I want to give you a gentle nudge into having to look at the fuckwits you associate with, take them to see this movie, right? Take them to see this movie. I don't recommend watching this if you hate slow burns. This does take a while to ratchet up, but I think it's definitely worth it. It is fucking crazy. If you want ideas for your Bucks party, do not watch this film. Might be the worst Bucks party of all time. Unless you want tips on what not to do, maybe. Might be a good one for that. If you want straight up horror, once again, dinner party, social horror. It is not like there's no ghosts, there's no demons, there's none of that shit. This is people being awful to each other, and we get to watch. If you like this and want something similar to this, I highly recommend Infinity Pool. It has very similar themes to Birdeater. Instead of, it switches out people being shit at a Bucks party to people being shit on vacation and what they can get away with on vacation. It's super psychedelic. It has a truly unhinged Mia Goth performance. At one point, she's like drinking a bottle of wine, eating KFC on the bonnet of a moving car, screaming, "James!" And that in a little Victorian fucking ghost voice, and that is in my head forever. That scene. Of course, I would also be remiss for not mentioning Wake in Fright. This movie is like millennial Wake in Fright. Wake in Fright's brilliant. It's a classic. It's from the 1970s. It's about a teacher who gets stuck in a rural mining town, and he sort of gets sucked into like the macho drinking and hunting culture of the mining town. Shit gets real bad. Shit gets real weird. He has the worst time. It's a fucking banger, and it's a classic. So if you like classic horror films, highly, highly, highly recommend Wake in Fright. As always, thanks for watching. I appreciate the fuck out of you guys. Every view I get, I truly, truly appreciate. Next week, I'll be reviewing In a Violent Nature. It is finally making its way to Australian shores, so I get to finally see it. So I get to see what all the hype's about. I know there's some really good kills in it, so I'm fucking excited. I'm fucking excited to see it. Peace.